This video will come across slightly schizophrenic, but it is tethered together and it does make sense. Bernie Sanders gets the opportunity to slam Donald Trump's trade policy, particularly this war with China that Donald Trump has been having. Sanders slams it. Now, part of the reason he slams it is because oftentimes people, especially journalists, like to make this tether between Trump and Sanders. It's like, hey, you may disagree with him on other stuff, but you agree with him on a trade policy, to which Bernie Sanders has to explain, I do not. It's just that I believe that these trade policies have been disastrous. So he has to explain that to Anderson Cooper, and he slams him. He makes a very strong case. It's a low-powered, low-energy Sanders, but he still makes a very strong case. The problem here is Uber is capitalism. I know that sounds completely disconnected. I'll explain what I mean coming up. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. And like I said, Uber is capitalism, and I would stand by it. It's like, Jamal, that is so random. What the hell does that mean? I'll get to that in a moment. Bernie Sanders is having a conversation with Anderson Cooper. Bernie Sanders is asked a question about trade policy, meaning this trade war that Donald Trump has decided to have with China. And by the way, that trade war was also taking place under the Democrats. It was just called something different, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There were more people that were on board for that particular policy, however. But in this case, Bernie Sanders is going to explain his differences here. Now, Sanders has been against these trade deals because these trade deals were corporate giveaways, and you can look at the trade deal even at the time and knew what was going to take place. There was going to be a bleeding of jobs. You knew that because the incentive in capitalism is to maximize your profit, and the trade deals allowed for a very particular way to maximize your profit. It just so happened it was done at the expense of the workers in the country. Allow Bernie Sanders to explain this to Anderson Cooper, but there's a point here that I want to make. Uber is capitalism. Let's hear Sanders.
I want to start with the tariff fight with China, something the president today called a, quote, little squabble, unquote. Senator Sanders, this is maybe where you come closest to agreeing with President Trump as on trade policy. You've talked about support for tariffs against China. I know you've said you disagree with how the president is implementing it. How should he be handling this?
Well, for a start, no, I don't agree with Donald Trump in terms of his trade policy. I think historically, our trade policies have been a disaster for American workers. The Permanent Normal Trade Relations trade agreement has cost us some 3 million decent paying jobs. It's part of the race to the bottom where workers today are working longer hours for low wages because companies have threatened to shut down in America and move abroad. Farmers in the Midwest have been hurt very, very hard by these tariffs. So no, I am not in agreement with Trump on that. What I do understand is that our trade policies in the past have failed. Last numbers that I saw, we had about a $400 billion trade deficit with China, which is not a good thing. But what we need to do is to figure out a way that we develop a trade policy which is fair for American workers. It is fair for our farmers. It is not written by the CEOs of large corporations who then are throwing American workers out on the street. One of the ways, Anderson, that I think we have got to move, we have got to demand decent corporate citizenship of the major corporations in this country. You know, what's happening today, and has happened for many, many years now, is corporations that are making money shut down in America, move to low-wage countries, and then the next day they're in line to get government contracts. They give themselves compensation packages for the CEOs that are 300 times what their workers are making. And I think we have got to say to those corporations, you know what, if you want a government contract, you're going to have to be a decent employer. Pay your workers a decent wage, allow them to form unions if they want to. You just cannot continue to be as greedy as you have been.
Sanders is the horse that I back. Everything that Sanders has said there is right, up to a point. Why do we need a New Deal? Does anybody ever ask that question? Why do we need a New Deal? Why are we in a situation again where this stuff that was, fought over, talked about? I mean, at the time FDR was in office, before he died, he was trying to put down, a federal not jobs guarantee, but a workers' rights proposal. How do we go backwards? Assume for the moment that Bernie Sanders gets what he wants. Corporations start behaving like citizens, whatever that means. And they start behaving fairly, whatever that means. Because keep in mind, a billionaire will look you in the face and say, me having this $1 billion is perfectly fair. I earned it. Fair, in this case, is somewhat perspective. This notion of morality in this argument is somewhat a perspective thing. It makes it somewhat of a difficult thing to come to. I agree with what Sanders is saying. My issue with it is, if you put through a proposal and in 10 years you're fighting about it again, did the proposal succeed? If ultimately it failed. I guess what I'm saying is whatever you do needs to have an element in it that fundamentally changes the system. So you don't get on this hamster wheel where you're continually fighting about something over and over again, and the mechanism of rolling back your changes exists within the system itself. FDR put through changes that lasted for 50, 60 years, but as cash entered the political system, chipping away. Because at that point, cash became the the main item within the context of the system itself, in which case all of these rules and regulations that were put there by politicians, who were being financed by people of means, who wanted those policies to be removed, who wanted those policies to be rolled back, slowly, over time, rolled back. So at any particular context in time, it would seem perfectly normal for that society, not being aware that 30, 40 years before, it was not that way. My point is this: Sanders is right. But how do you change that when every incentive within the context of the system is to behave that way? How do you try to get corporate citizenship to be quote unquote good citizens, as he calls it, when everything in them, from the standpoint of the system itself and the feedback mechanism of the system, because the more that you earn in some cases, that's your standard, right? How much am I earning? Now, there's some people that have a somewhat of vague morality built into this, but at the end of the day, maximizing your profit is the name of the game. It is what you're supposed to do. Sanders is trying to make this case that, yeah, you need to look after your employees. Does looking after my employees affect my bottom line? Yes. Okay. Then looking after employees is always cut against how much can I earn. The employees are always going to lose out of that process. Always. Because the company is always going to look for ways to increase their profits. I need to lower my cost of workers. I need to lower the cost of doing business. Just so happens that you can do that better outside the United States. So yeah, these companies make deals with China, or they move their factories to Guatemala, or they move their factories to Honduras, or whatever country. As long as the country has somewhat of a stable government, it can be repressive as long as it's stable, and they can do their business. And they can sell those products for dirt cheap, much cheaper than they could in the United States, then they can make a ton of profit. The only person who loses here is the American worker when they close that factory down in the United States. Why would they do things that have counter interest to their bottom line? I guess that's my point. And how do you, Bernie Sanders, get them to change their ways in this case? I don't know how you do that without touching the rail itself. I want to make this point that Uber is capitalism, man. There have been Uber and Lyft strikes. Now, while I was in Kenya, I had the opportunity to talk to Uber drivers, and they were in this incestuous relationship where the king, well, let's say the king's son, makes a deal with a company that keeps wages dirt cheap. You can ride from one side of Kenya to the other, $1. It's so cheap. It's hard to get it across. We ended up just giving the guy money on top of whatever he was getting for Uber because it was, again, it seemed blatantly and brutally unfair. But that was the relationship that these guys crafted. Of course Uber would do that because Uber is allowed to take more money and suck it to the top now. Do they care about the workers? No. But understand, Uber's job is not to care about the workers. Uber's job is to maximize their profits. All of these companies, Sanders, their job is not the workers. The workers is a means to an end, to them getting profit. It's a part of the machine. That needs to be very clear when they're saying, oh God, they're paying these workers so little. Yes, because that's how they maximize their profit. This is a systemic thing. This is not an individual person thing. It's not, oh, that CEO of the company is a horrible person. He may be, but he's functioning within a system that tells him that this is what he's supposed to do. If they increase wages on workers, if you ever watch the stock channel with a company that increases wages for workers, their stock price goes down. The market punishes them for that behavior. This is systemic. That's my point. This is systemic. Companies are functioning in the way that they need to in order to maximize their profit. Coming behind them, telling them to do something that's against them maximizing their profit is going to seem odd to them and something they're not going to want to do. Let's talk about Uber. There have been strikes in the United States for pay on Uber, meaning they want to be paid more. Uber is capitalism. There was a product that was already on the market called a taxi cab. Somebody comes along with an app that allows them to get people to do the job and function of a taxi cab. So you have a taxi cab, rebrand it for cheaper. Undercuts the value of the taxi cabs. Taxi cabs are brutalized. In France, there were riots over this. In some places, if they find that you are Uber, they will beat you up. No shit, seriously, in some of the countries we were in. Uber drivers were terrified, but they were undercutting the market. The prices for cabs drops, plummets. In all of the countries went plummets. Now, this is great for the consumer. Think of like Walmart, when you go in, you purchase a product. But for the worker themselves, you're purchasing that product from a store that pays their workers so little that many of them have to get government services. The person who's paying for that doesn't care. They don't care. They don't care if the person at the fast food window has a shirt on that says, smile. The shirt has to say it because the person at this point is somewhat of a servant of that company. They don't care. Americans in general don't care. So in the same way, a person gets into the cab, the Uber. They go from point A to point B. It does the job of the cab for much, much, much cheaper and without the regulations that the taxi cab has to do. Uber has been able to suck that additional money to the top. The workers, not so much. And this is kind of the point, right? Not only were they able to undercut the taxi cab, they were able to put workers in a situation where they were dependent upon the app while simultaneously being cheated by the app. You were getting less, and yet you were still dependent on the thing that allowed you to get less, while you knew that the company was raking in boohoo bucks. There were riots, there were protests against Uber recently. Here's the catch. Whatever Uber stock price is now, Uber will be okay, because there will be drivers desperate enough to drive for the companies. So despite the strike, those people still need to drive. Even in Kenya, despite the fact that they knew they were being screwed, they had no choice to drive because there were no jobs that they could have options on. These guys are in contest for self-driving cars. I will tell you this. The moment the self-driving car comes into place, all of those guys are going to lose their jobs. That car is going to be able to drive from point A to point B using solar power, not needing to stop, only for routine checkups and everything else. Each and every one of those Uber drivers are going to lose their jobs. And the job loss is going to go in line with, we need to increase our wages. Fine. Because at this point, the amount that they've increased their wages by is going to match up with the self-driving car. And that is going to be in their financial interest to do that. And people are going to decry this and say, what about the workers? And again, they're going to miss the point that the job of corporations and companies is not to hire workers. The job of those things are to make money. The workers, and whatever stupid human trick that these guys use in order to produce whatever product, is a means to an end. The workers are means to an end in this process, not the process or the point of the process itself. They will always get the shaft. They will always get a raw deal. What Bernie Sanders is saying here is right. But do you want to get yourself to a point where the system itself produces better outcomes, as opposed to you needing people to be quote-unquote good corporate citizens? The point is to change the system, not to just browbeat people into doing the right thing. The point is to change the system. And until Sanders gets to that point, He's going to be always slightly off kilter. I'll leave it here. Oh, and by the way, before I end this, Baltazar made a joke, but I don't know if he's here. So, and I don't know it off the top of my head, but Baltazar, when I find that tweet, I'll give you a heads up on it. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks all.